Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom and Shavua Tov for our first hookup for exactly 4 weeks since the 18th of Tishrei, the day of the passing of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. And today, the 16th of Cheshvan, just 4 weeks later, is an auspicious day. The month of Cheshvan is a month of the light of the Torah, lighting up the increasingly long nights of the fall and the winter in the northern hemisphere. The 16th of Cheshvan is the day of the departure from this world of a very beloved figure in the Jewish world of our time, and that is Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, Zecher Tzadik Livrocho, a remarkable figure, a figure who emanated love and peace and harmony and connection to God with music. And Reb Shlomo was with us until 1994 when he passed away on this day, actually singing a Holocaust survivor's song in an airplane that he was flying on one of his endless trips to reach out to brothers and sisters. And this was his last trip, and he was brought to rest on Har HaMenuchot in the holy city of Jerusalem. And it's an appropriate day to speak about the subject today of who is a ger, a subject that has been the subject of, has been surrounded by raging controversy in the past few weeks on internet and on Facebook and in circles of people who are in some way connected with the teaching of Torah, to Jewish people, to non-Jewish people, to people that might be termed Noahides, to people that might be termed Gerim. And I would like to speak about my own understanding of what is going on here in this discussion. You know, the entire history of creation of all of the worlds can be summed up in a story that is readily understandable to Jewish people and to anyone across the world, and that is the story of Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. This great egg balanced on the tip of the wall, and of course when the egg falls off the wall, all of the white and the yolk and the shell goes scattered flowing in all directions, and all the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty together again. In the Kabbalistic account of the creation of the worlds, the world begins as a conception in the mind of the Creator, which the Creator brings into being, and in order to create a realm of evil, the Creator contracts his light from the world And when light now comes radiated successively into the vacated space, the first thing that happens is that the divine light, as it projects into this contracted space, cause a breaking of the vessels in all directions. And the entire duration of our history is that nobody can put them all together again. The way that the breaking off the vessels is portrayed in the Kabbalah is of the fall of the primordial kings alluded to in Genesis at the end of the portion of Vayishlach, when a succession of the kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel is described in the narrative in each case as Vayimloich Vayomos, Vayimloich Vayomos, he reigned, then he died, he reigned, then he died. One after the other, these 7 kings alluding to the 7 lower sephirot in their unrectified state. When the lower realms are unrectified, each element is in conflict and pulling against the others. Everyone is trying to pull in their own directions. Ana emloch, I will rule, I will rule, I want to be the king, I want to be the king. And that's what machloket is all about. There is holy machloket and there is unholy machloket. The Hebrew term machloket comes from the Hebrew word chelek, which is a part. Machloket is when something gets divided into parts. And there is holy division and conflict when through a thesis and through an antithesis we come to a synthesis, as in the case of the love of David and Jonathan, the case of the house of Hillel and Shammai, whose discussions and debates were for the sake of heaven, to illuminate the different aspects of the divine edifice of the Torah. And then the archetype of unholy conflict is Korach, who divides against Moses and Aaron, not for the sake of heaven, but for the sake of self-aggrandizement. He says, everyone's holy, and I'm going to be the revolutionary king of all the holy people. He wanted to rule. Well, now, we're confronted in the past few weeks with this very confusing machloket between a number of different rabbis. On the one side, there are the distinguished rabbis in the city of Tzfat in North Israel, Rabbi Chaim Chlorfin, who is the author of an outstanding scholarly work on the vision of the temple in Ezekiel, with the most splendid, magnificent illustrations of the temple and all authenticated verse by verse, commentary by commentary, based upon the classic sources, a real masterpiece of scholarship. And in recent years, Rabbi Chlorfin has been interested in one subject primarily, which is not only the realization of the vision of the future temple, but also the vision of the nations of the world coming to the temple, which will be the house of prayer for all the nations, and particularly has shown interest in a concept which is found in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, and in the Halacha, in Maimonides' Code, and other legal sources based upon the Talmud, which is that of not only the familiar subject of the Ger Tzedek, the righteous convert, the righteous proselyte, who, like Ruth in the classic case, embraces all of the 613 commandments. And in our times, there are people who spend years and years yearning and working towards being recognized as a Ger Tzedek by a competent Orthodox rabbinical Bet Din, and are justly proud of their achievement to be accepted and recognized in the community as Ger Tzedek and as a part of Kahal Yisrael, the Assembly of Israel. But then there is another concept in the Torah of one called the Ger Toshav. The Ger Toshav is one that, in biblical law, and in temple times is not an Israelite and does not observe the 613 commandments, but has eschewed idolatry, has denied and disavowed idolatry, and has accepted and embraced the 7 laws of the Noahide Code. And such a Ger Toshav, a non-Israelite, has special rights in the land of Israel to dwell in the land. Indeed, Israel are commanded to give life to the Ger Toshav, lachayoto, to give him life, vitality, to protect him from danger, and to help him sustain himself. And indeed, since he is not observing the 613 commandments, he is allowed to eat meat that will be forbidden to an Israelite. And the Torah tells us that the meat of a nevela animal that cannot be consumed by an Israelite may be given as a gift to the Ger Toshav. And he has residence privileges in the land of Israel in virtue of his public acceptance of the 7 Noahide laws. And Rabbi Chaim Chlorfin has been looking towards a situation where the temple, images of which we have become familiar with, will not be an abstracted reality in a dream. Behind me right now is the image from the book of the Messianic Temple by Rabbi Chlorfin of the actual temple building. We're looking here towards the ulam, the vestibule, and into the temple in this very magnificent and beautiful illustration. And it's a tremendous credit to Rabbi Chlorfin that not only has he sought to bring to the attention of the public the concept of the coming temple, but he is also encouraging the public to envisage a situation in which the coming temple is actually a reality, in the sense that not only are Israel serving God in the temple, but also the nations of the world, the righteous of the nations, are looking to the temple and to the restored Torah Sanhedrin on the Temple Mount for guidance in the performance of the 7 Noahide laws. And the concept of the Ger Toshav is well established in the halacha, and Rabbi Chlorfin, together with another rabbi in Tzfat, Rabbi David Katz, known for work in a project called Sol Mazal, have been addressing a further refinement of the concept of the Ger Toshav, where they are saying, and their ideas are certainly supported by opinions among the authoritative Rishonim, early rabbinical scholars of the post-Talmudic period. They represent views that are found in the writings of great authorities, and they are saying that the Ger Toshav not only must observe the 7 Noahide laws, but also is permitted voluntarily to take on him or herself performance of certain of the 613 commandments of Israel. And Rabbi Chlorfin and Rabbi Katz of Tzfat, perhaps inebriated by the pure, crystal clear air of Tzfat, have promoted through a book of which they are the co-authors, and in their work and their teachings in the media and in their travels, the concept that a person is not born as a Jew or as an Israelite may, if they wish, embrace commandments of the Torah that are applicable to Israel. Now, it's estimated that out of the 613 commandments to Israel, 60 at least are actually included under the 7 Noahide laws. That 60 of the specific mitzvot are an integral part of the Noahide code itself. But over and above this, Rabbis Chlorfin and Katz are saying that the Noahide ger, toshav, is permitted, and even in our time, to carry out many of the other 613 commandments. Well, this is not in Jewish Orthodox circles a majority view, and I think a comment on the ongoing controversy by Rabbi Chlorfin in recent days in a blog, that what he feels is lacking from those who are attacking him and Rabbi Katz is exception that is the awareness that we are now in times of Geula. We are now in Messianic times, and therefore that we should already be looking towards a Messianic situation. Now, it can certainly be said that this is not too far away from the position of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, who passed away in the same year as Rabbi Karlebach. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe in the modern era was the public figure and authority who spoke most vocally about not only the importance of the observance of the 7 Noahide laws by the nations of the earth, but also the obligation on any Jewish person that has the ability to do so to promote the practice of the 7 Noahide laws, and particularly in a loving way. This is one of 2 innovations in the modern era of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, both of which reflect modern realities. One is of the promotion of the idea of addressing the nations of the earth with the imperative of the Noahide code, and the other is the concept of the captive child, the Tinok Shenishba Ben Agoyim, a baby, a child that was in captivity among the nations, and the descendants of such children from generation to generation. The Lubavitcher Rebbe applied this known Talmudic concept to the situation we are faced with today, which is very far away from the orderly way in which the halacha presents the laws of the commandments to Israel and the laws of the commandments to the Noahides. In our time, there is enormous universal confusion over who is a Jew. The question of who is a Jew was a raging controversy in Israel in the years after the establishment of the State of Israel, and it's after that very famous debate which was taking place in my younger days, who is a Jew, that the title of today's discussion is called Who is a Ger? This is a subject indeed which does concern all of Israel and all of the Jewish people, particularly now as we are in a situation of the great sharpening of the international war of religions and cultures and ideologies, which is raging in front of our eyes. Perhaps 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, it was still possible to imagine that you can carry on pursuing your life in a fairly normal way. The great watershed was 9/11, 2001, the destruction of the World Trade Center, when suddenly Islamic terror took the center of the world stage and has remained there ever since, and is growing and growing. And we're all being challenged today to think about our values, our beliefs, our activities, and where we are headed. And I've discussed already in previous talks about how this is indeed the time of the judgment. here we are seeing judgments executed across the world day after day. And the extent of the present controversy against Rabbis Chlorfin and Katz, despite their representing a perhaps more extreme view than that of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that so much are we in the age of Geula that it's time to revive the concept of the Ger Toshav. The Lubavitcher Rebbe certainly encouraged all of us to study the concept of the redemption and to understand its concepts, to think redemption, and therefore certainly we're in a similar direction. But there has been a great counter-reaction, and this is an aspect of the time of din, the time of judgment that we are now in, a big counter-reaction to the promotion by Rabbis Chlorfin and particularly Rabbi Katz very vocally and often in a quite pugnacious way, and a way that perhaps would fit more inside a Bet Midrash in a formal Torah Study Center than right in front of the public eye on YouTube in talk after talk. And a counter-reaction has been engendered, has come out very forcefully in recent weeks. In the English-speaking world today, one of the outstanding authorities on the concept of the Ger and the concept of the Noahide is Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, known both to the English-speaking world through translations of his teachings and particularly known in Israel by his many books. And the view of Rabbi Schwartz is far more conservative than the view of Rabbis Katz and Rabbi Chlorfin. Rabbi Schwartz is certainly aware, and I've become familiar with Rabbi Schwartz over a number of years when he has been, I've been praying in the same synagogue that he has on Friday evenings, and he has been addressing the congregation week after week, and I've had a chance to see just how aware Rabbi Schwartz is of this era of Geula. However, Rabbi Schwartz's view on the concept of the Ger Toshav in our time, in his opinion, it is highly recommended not to teach non-Jews to perform any of the commandments. Rabbi Schwartz certainly does not dispute the known decisions of Moses Maimonides' Rambam, the authoritative 12th century codifier, in his Mishnah Torah, that a Ben Noach, a Noachide, is allowed to voluntarily take on the practice of any of the 630 commandments, with the exception of the full practice of the Shabbat and the study of the Torah. However, Rabbi Schwartz is against recommending and teaching people to embrace these mitzvahs voluntarily, but he perfectly accepts that it is permissible for the non-Jewish person to perform mitzvahs as a Ben Noah, as a Ger. However, Rabbi Schwartz accepts the majority view that in our time, the concept of the Ger Toshav is not itself relevant. It's according to a view of Maimonides also that the concept of the Ger Toshav is bound up with the land, with all of its agricultural laws and all of its temple laws when the temple is standing, but not in the time of exile. And Rabbi Schwartz's views are that rabbis should not be going out to the non-Jewish people and advocating the performance of the mitzvot. And there are a number of other rabbis that are looking to Rabbi Joel Schwartz for guidance, and these rabbis are rabbis who have authored a publicized and public letter to warn the public about the teachings of Rabbis Chlorfin and Katz. And the letter is expressed in a very blunt terms, and I would say rather extreme terms. And what is very sad about this controversy and this conflict and the chasing after Rabbis David Katz and Rabbi Chaim Chlorfin is that the tone of the opposition to them is not something that brings any credit at all, unfortunately, on to the rabbinical community. In an open letter that was publicized for public dissemination on October the 20th, the undersigned, whose names I will not read here, feel compelled to, and thank God I'm friends with quite a few of them, as I am with Rabbis Katz and Rabbi Chlorfin, but they say that the teachings of Rabbis Katz and Chlorfin and the pseudo-Ger movement that's grown from these teachings, and therefore they speak as associates, as trained rabbis, they say, serving the Noahide public from across a spectrum of Torah traditions and perspectives. Having consulted with Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, referred to what they call the marketing of the non-Jewish Noahide identity called Ger is attractive packaging and self-righteous vitriol that cannot cover up the truth that it is a contrived maverick redefinition of codified Torah concepts that neither they nor any rabbinical body in our time, for that matter, have any authority, right, or reason to alter. In other words, they're saying we must stay in the times of pre-redemption. They acknowledge that there are rabbinical authorities among the Rishonim who are sources for the teachings of Rabbis Chlorfin and Katz. They admit that outstanding modern authorities have been there, but they claim that this is a radical departure from the accepted halacha that nobody in our time is authorized to make. Well, all of these pronouncements by the rabbis, with due respect to all of them, and with due respect to Rabbi Schwartz, nobody really today is authorized to state what the halacha is, because if you ask the Israeli state rabbinate what the halacha is, they'll give you one answer. And if you ask the rabbinate of the Edah Haredit, the ultra-Orthodox Jerusalem Haredi rabbinate, they'll give you a different answer, and you'll get a different answer if you ask a so-called conservative rabbinical Bet Din, or if you ask a reform Bet Din. And today we are in total confusion about what the halacha really is. And certainly the authors of the public letter, signed on this letter, cannot impinge upon the right of Rabbis Chlorfin and Katz to give expression to teachings that are certainly do have sources in the Rishonim. There is certainly a problem of communication with in the case of Rabbi Katz, who, when I listen to him, I can't often make head or tail what he's talking about. His mind just races so far ahead. And if he's challenged, he can get quite pugnacious. And it is this, it seems, that is one of the things that has provoked this letter against Rabbi Katz and Rabbi Chlorfin. And although Rabbi Chlorfin is mentioned, it's somewhat unfair because all of the specific attacks in the letter are all against Rabbi Katz. Nevertheless, I think there is certainly a great point in this opposition to the two, and there is something about machloket that is necessary and functional in our times. There's no one who spoke more about machloket than Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. Rabbi Nachman's teachings are full of discussions about the meaning and the purpose of conflict and controversy in the Jewish people and among the rabbis of Israel. And Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan, Part 1, Teaching 5, that if you see machloket among the authorities, then you should understand that that comes to you, that comes for you, to help you to refine and purify your ideas. It's a challenge to you. Rabbi Nachman, who was faced with the most formidable machloket in his time, because he wanted to follow the new path that is really the old path. And there arose against him some of the most authoritative rabbis of his time. And he suffered the machloket, and it did not cause him to budge from his pathway, because he knows that, as it says in Kohelet, for Elokim Mavakesh es nirdof, God will seek after, give succor to the one that is being persecuted. And Rabbi Nachman teaches us that when we are confronted by machloket, we need to learn to be silent. We need to learn to look inwards. We need to learn to purify ourselves. And certainly this machloket about the applicability of the concept of the ger in our time and the permissibility of a non-Jewish person taking on the observance of one or more of the mitzvot, there's certainly a challenge to all of the people in the orbit of the so-called Noahide wider community, which in itself has many subgroupings and different conceptions and different interests. It's a challenge to anybody who feels challenged by it. There are some who don't feel at all challenged by this, actually. There are some who consider it all some Noahides, some self-professed Noahides. There's one who has a blog that calls himself the Academy of Shem, who is perhaps an ex-Christian and coming to the Noahide code not as a non-Jewish person that is subjecting himself to the Torah, but because the Noahide code makes the most sense of all. But he is laughing at this controversy within the rabbinical community, and he says, as far as the non-Jewish people are concerned, all of this is completely missing the point. He feels that all of these different rabbis involved on both sides of this controversy, all of them have their own interests, all of them have their own communities that they're wanting to maintain boundaries and make sure that their people that they have in their pockets will remain loyal to them, will not get sidetracked on any other idea. That would be an uncharitable view of the opposition to Rabbis Chlofin and Rabbi Katz. I think what we do need to take out of this is the profound seriousness with which not only any non-Jew should take upon himself the Noahide code, but also the profound seriousness with which any Noahide would take on a mitzvah. Maimonides tells us in his code, when speaking of the permissibility of a non-Jewish person, a Noahide, carrying out a mitzvah, that it must be done according to the halacha of that mitzvah. And it's a very serious matter. But there's something about this ongoing controversy that, to my mind, entirely misses the point when it comes to one of the most important phenomena in our time, where we're dealing not only with Noahides, we are dealing with people that can only be called the Tinok Shenishba, the child that was taken captive. And before we leave the actual controversy as we're hearing about it between the rabbis of Tzfat and those who've come out against them under the authority of Rabbi Schwartz, and there is certainly a very important point to a letter that Rabbi Schwartz penned, which is that he feels that when the two rabbis from Tzfat went to ask for his authorization of for a letter of approbation to their book, they did not enable him to understand the full novelty of the pathway that they were carving out. And he says he retracts any endorsement or approbation of them, and he says that in his opinion, their view is not according to the halacha. That does not undermine their opinion. And to get back, before we go on to the concept of Tinok Shnishba, to the teachings of Rabbi Nachman about Machloket, Rabbi Nachman teaches us that the study of the different viewpoints in the halacha is itself the key to the resolution of Machloket, conflict. The resolution of conflict is the future concept, the concept of Isaiah in chapter 11, when he depicts the Messianic age, and he depicts the tremendous peace that will reign in the Messianic age. And he evokes it, and he says to us, and there shall be, justice will be the belt of his loins, and faith will be the belt of his waist, and the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard with the kid, and the young bull and the lion will be pasturing together, and his little child will be leading them. And he goes on, and after all these resolution of these opposites, he tells us, "V'lo yashchisu b'kol har kodshi." They will not destroy in all of my holy mountain. This destruction, this pernicious attack on others, bringing out the dirty washing in the full gaze of the public, that will no longer be in the temple when opposites will be reconciled. And there the parasha concludes, "They shall no longer do evil or destroy in all of my holy mount, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the seas." The earth will be filled with de'ah, with knowledge of God, the knowledge, the de'ah, that is able to recognize and find a bridge between the opposites. And we are at once instructed and commanded to deal with present realities, but to keep our thoughts and our minds on the future. And in my own work, particularly through internet, now going over 23 years, since 1993, 24 years, is that the revolution in technology and the ability to communicate with private individuals literally anywhere in the world, first it was through email, then it became through Facebook and the social networks, now WhatsApp. One can literally communicate with people all over the world. There is a constituency that does not fall into the category of the Ger Toshav, nor into the category of the Noahide. And these are people who are convinced that they have some inner soul connection with the people of Israel. Now, there have always been people who consider themselves to be Israel, the real Israel, or connected with Israel. In the replacement theology after the growth of Christianity, there were those who consider themselves to have taken over Israel through the church. Then came the Islamic Ummah, which gives place only to those who submit to Islam. But we are talking today about people from Africa, across North, Central, South Africa, in South Asia, across from even in the Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and going eastwards through India, Pakistan, and towards the Far East. There are people, and I'm talking about people who have some knowledge of the English language. I have no idea what is going on in the hinterland of China or of the former Russian republics. I was speaking the other day to a man from Afghanistan. We were speaking about the Pashtun, and it's quite clear that the Pashtun of Afghanistan consider themselves to be the authentic children of Israel, and there is a Pashtun leader that calls himself a prince of the tribe of Israel. Now, these are people who are not and will not be satisfied with the Noahide code if they are truly a part of Israel. The concept of the Tinok Shenishba was discussed very much by the Rebbe of Lubavitch in the post-Holocaust era, addressing Jews both in North America and across the world, dealing with the post-Holocaust situation, which had caused such a massive overturn of populations, the destruction of a third of the Jewish people, and the sinking into ever greater alienation of huge portions of the Jewish population whose grandparents and great-grandparents had been observant Jews. And you were dealing with generations who were brought up by parents who had had no exposure to Torah teaching. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had a love for every Israel, every Jewish soul, and also profound love for all of God's creations, wanted to reach out to the Tinok Shenishba, whether it was the Jew whose family had assimilated 3 generations ago, 5 generations ago, or longer. And what we are seeing today is the emergence of people who have been separated from the mainstream of Jewry in recent centuries, such as the Bnei Anusim. The Bnei Anusim, who are to be found across North and South America and in Europe and in Asia, Indonesia, and elsewhere, the Bnei Anusim cannot be satisfied by being told that you are not Jewish because your Judaism is not recognized by a rabbinical Bet Din, and therefore you may not perform the commandments, except for the 7 Noahide commandments. This does not speak to the soul of the Tinok Shenishba. And the same applies to the millions of people in Africa. For example, over 30 million members of the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, or the Lemba tribe in South Africa, who are quite convinced that they are Israelite in their origins, and whose customs and whose practices bear remarkable similarity to Torah practices. And you cannot address these people and say, well, you are not recognized by a Jewish Bet Din, and unless you come and reside in an Orthodox Jewish community and go through an Orthodox Jewish conversion, we will not recognize you as Jewish. You cannot say this to these people. And indeed, I think the best words are those given in Maimonides, in a passage that, in all of this discussion and debate raging between these different rabbis, I've not seen quoted, but this is really the key to the solution to the issue of the Tinok Shenishba. Maimonides, in his code in Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, the last of the 14 books of the Yad Chazakah, in chapter 3, he's talking about those who rebel against the Torah. He's been talking about the case of the rebellious elder who defies the authority of the Sanhedrin, and he says that as soon as a person is publicly known to deny the validity of the oral Torah, and this one is called an apikoros, such a person is in a situation where if an Israelite saw the person in danger of his life, they would not be obliged to save his life, since he is not considered to be a valid member of the children of Israel, including those who say that the Torah was not given from heaven, and likewise those who have changed their religion, who have converted out of Judaism. And all of these, he says, are included in this concept of the kofrim, the deniers, and the apikosim. And then he goes on in paragraph 3, Halacha Gimel of chapter 3 of Hilchos Mamrim, the laws of rebels, he says, what is the above talking about? Somebody who denied the oral Torah in his mind and denied anything that he thought differently, and he went after his own opinion and after the stubbornness of his own heart, and he denies the authority of the oral Torah in the same way that in the late Second Temple period, Tzadok and Baisos, those who founded those known as the Tzedokim in the Second Temple period, and those who went after them. And now the key words, the crucial words is aval, but. The children of those erroneous people and the children of their children, that their fathers pushed them aside from the Torah, and they were born among the Karaites, for example. And it was the Karaites who raised these children and grandchildren in accordance with their view and their ideology. This is like a little child that has been captured among them, hu ketinok shenishbo benehem, and they raise that child, and he is simply not zariz, he's not eager and energetic to follow the pathways of the mitzvot. He's never been accustomed to it. It's alien to his culture. And he says, Maimonides, such a person is called anus. He is called that he is under duress. And even though he has heard later on that he is a Yehudi, even though he saw the Yehudim and their religion, he is one that is under duress because he was raised with the errors of those who raised him. And he says, listen to the very beautiful words, so it is those that we have mentioned who follow the ways of the heretical sects of the Karaites, etc. He says, therefore it is fit to bring them back to repentance and to draw them with words of peace until they will return to the eternal Torah. The words of Maimonides in his code, Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Shoftim, the laws of Judges, chapter 3, in the 14th book of the Mishnah Torah, speaking about how to deal with the Tinok Shenishba, to draw them through words of peace. And instead of washing all of our dirty washing out in public and thoroughly confusing the supposed non-Jews who are interested in understanding the truth about the Noahide code, we should be helping people to distinguish between the different backgrounds, the different statuses. And this is a subject which I hope to pursue in greater depth through the writings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, who in his master work, Likutei Moharan, in numerous places addresses specifically the concept of the ger and gives full expression to the idea that there are gerim who join the mainstream of the people of Israel, and there are other gerim who know and acknowledge the truth in the place where they are at. Well, now, it's not at all so clear-cut that a Noahide may not have any connection with the mitzvot. To understand the reaction of the conservative rabbis, we have to, that is to say, the Shamranim, those who are remaining loyal to the halacha that has served Jewish communities for hundreds of years during the exile. It's with extreme caution that rabbis traditionally in Europe ever entered an issue of giur, of conversion. I once had a conversation with the one who was then the chief rabbi of Holland in connection with a young man that was trying to become a ger tzedek in Holland. And the rabbi said, it's not going to happen. We draw them for decades, 15, 20 years, And the reason is because in Europe it used to be a capital offense for a Jew to convert a non-Jew to Judaism. In Christian Europe, as it is today in Islamic countries, it was impossible for a Jew to address a non-Jew about religion. It could lead to death, it could lead to pogroms, it could lead to violence, it could lead to expulsions. So, not surprisingly, the conventional rabbis are very cautious about the whole subject of accepting Ger Tzedek, even in outside of Holland, not necessarily for 15, 20 years, but certainly often the Ger process is several years, the process of a full conversion. And the same conservative view of Giyur applies to what is today a revolutionary and Geula concept of the Ger Toshav. And not surprisingly, conventional rabbis are very cautious about this. However, the developments in the contemporary era have led to some changes. And these have been necessitated by the arisal of the State of Israel, which is officially a Jewish state and has its rabbinate, and the rabbinate were required to adjudicate in questions of full giyur, of full conversion to Judaism by all kinds of people. Many different people that were admitted to Israel under Israel's law of return would grant admission and citizenship in Israel even to one who did not have matrilineal Jewish descent. And major rabbis in Israel were, including the late Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who served in this capacity for decades, giving halachic decisions to the Israeli army, who often were feeling the need to provide conversions not through the long drawn-out traditional process. And this more lenient view of the process of Giyur has been given expression to by a rabbi in Israel today who was a student of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and he is known as he is known as Rabbi Chaim Amselem. Rabbi Chaim Amselem is quite a notorious figure in the Israeli political scene. He was a member of Israel's Sephardic Shas party, is himself a Sephardic Jew, but he was a little too revolutionary for the others in the party, and he's been outspoken in our times about the need for the Jewish state to adopt a broader view of who is a part of Israel. And I've had personal discussions with Rabbi Amselem, and have discussed the work that I'm doing with people in Africa who are craving and asking for authoritative Torah guidance based upon orthodox accepted sources, and has been most encouraging about making the knowledge available and leaving people decide for themselves who they are. And the more we can provide people with the information about the alternatives and the options available, the better armed people will be to make their own decisions. And at the end of the day, it all boils down to the love of God, because whether a person is in a place where they even have a possibility of undergoing a Jewish Orthodox conversion should they wish, or whether they are far away from any Jewish community, what God wants is the heart. And God certainly respects the conversion certificate gained through sweat and tears and toil and blood. God certainly respects the full gear, but God also wants the heart, and wants the heart of the Bnei Noach. He wants the heart of those who want not to be a full member of Israel, but to go with Israel. In biblical Israel, in temple Israel, on the Shabbat, everything stops, and although the Noahides are allowed to continue with their own private melachot, they have to respect the Shabbat. Rabbi Yoel Schwartz himself has provided liturgy for the Noahide, for the Shabbat and for the festivals and daily prayers, and given guidance about other life events. And these are for people who do not wish to be a member of Israel, do not feel able, do not feel qualified to be members of Am Yisrael as a full convert or in any capacity. I feel a deep association with the people of Israel, with the Torah of Israel, with the land of Israel. I want to walk with us, to march with us when it's Pesach, to join in, to be there even to serve the meal at the Seder night, to be part of the arranging and the building of the Sukkah. On the Shabbat, yes, to serve where necessary as the Shabbos Goy. There's something very beautiful about the interaction between the Ben Noah and the Torah observant Yisrael when it comes to cooperatively respecting the Shabbat by enabling the non-Israelite to perform labors that are necessary that the Israelite could not, in normal circumstances, carry out. And that's the sense in which the temple for which we are hoping and dreaming is the house of prayer for all the nations, where all the nations will come up for Sukkot, and all the nations will acknowledge the Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, and not necessarily all as meticulous black-coated Orthodox Jews, or knitted kippah, white-shirted Jews, or any other kind of Jews, but every one of the nations knowing God. Ki molo ha'oretz deo es Hashem. The earth shall be filled with the knowledge, with Hashem, the people's knowledge. Deo es Hashem, their knowledge, their awareness, their outlook will be with Hashem, consonant with the Torah of Hashem, whether as Israel performs the 613 commandments, whether as B'nai Noach, whether as Ger Toshav that has embraced and accepted other mitzvah, that all will serve God cooperatively in an era of tikkun and not an era of shvira, of breakage. And that is the message to these rabbis, and I think this is the message that they would certainly should take from Rabbi Chaim Chlorfein's outstanding book on the future temple, which relates very closely to my own work on the same subject called The Secrets of the Future Temple, speaking about the form of the temple to Ezekiel. And Ezekiel tells the people, when you will be ashamed of your deeds, ashamed of your words, then you'll be able to see the form of this temple. And some are closer to it and some are farther away from it. Some think they are close to it, but actually they're separated by a veil often of their own pride and inability to take the scales off their eyes. But that's another question, that you and I pursue the ways of peace, the ways of brotherhood, the ways of love of Israelites and the ways of love of Jews, the love of the Ger, the love of all of the briot, all of God's creations, to teach God's Torah, to love God's Torah, and to make peace through God's Torah, all of whose pathways are peace. Shavua Tov Morach.